Welcome to another episode of the Freedom Lovin' Podcast. This is Kevin, and this is number 94. Thanks for listening, and welcome to all the new listeners we have. The last couple shows, I've noticed a spike in downloads, so really appreciate that. And if you've been listening to Brett's School Sucks podcast, that's an awesome show, and I'm glad to have you aboard here on Freedom Lovin'. I think there's a lot of cross-pollination. And today I have an interview coming up with Darrell Becker of Voluntary Visions. And we talk a lot about nonviolent communication, or NVC. And I think there's a lot that can be learned from this episode, no matter where you are, no matter why you're listening to this show, whether it's to just improve your communication or if you're looking for some tips on how to get better at business or personal relationships. This is a really good one. So not much else going on. I wanted to mention that next week there is a convention or a conference here in San Diego called Traffic and Conversion, and it's all about internet marketing. It's probably the best internet marketing conference of the year, and they typically have it in San Diego. So I'm pretty lucky. It's right in my backyard, and I'll be there. So I'm wondering if anybody listening is coming. So I've got some, I'm going to be meeting up with several people, and I'd love to meet you if you are a listener of the show and see what you're up to and see if there's anything that we can chat about. So I'm sure there is. So yeah, just hit me up if you're going to be in town next week. And that's about it. If you like this show, please give us a rating and review, and I'll read it on the next show. That would be on iTunes. The easiest way is to go to your computer and pull up your iTunes app, and then you can go ahead and click on rating and review, and then go ahead and put the review. And I found out that you cannot give a rating and a review on your phone, or else it's very difficult to find out how to do that either way. So anyway, that's about it. Enjoy the interview with Darrell. Have a great week. Go out there and build some freedom, and we'll talk to you soon. Well, I'm really excited to have my friend Darrell Becker on the show today, and Darrell runs the site at voluntaryvisions.com. Hey, Darrell, welcome to Freedom Lovin'.
Hey, Kevin, great to be on your show.
Yeah, so can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself before we get going here?
Sure. I am an acupuncturist and holistic healthcare provider living on the Big Island of Hawaii. I have been working for some years in the fields of cognitive and empathetic skill sets, and it's what I mostly am known about on the internet. I do a lot of shows with Brett Finot on the School Sucks podcast, and a bunch of shows with other people as well. So right now, I've mostly been a professional pod guest, a guest on other people's shows, and I use Voluntary Visions as my portfolio of my appearances and work and essays that I write.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think I first heard you on Wes's podcast, Complete Liberty, a while back. And then you kind of went out from there and did a lot of other shows. And then I was also on the School Sucks podcast, so there's a lot of connections here, I guess.
Yeah, we definitely have a lot of crossover community thing going on right now. So, yeah, definitely I got to hear about Wes's work back in 2009 when I first found out about Brett Finot, and when I first started listening to the School Sucks podcast. In doing that, it was very quick that Brett started doing collaborations with Wes Bertrand, and I quickly became aware of Wes's work, Complete Liberty, and pretty much devoured that entire podcast and his books and such. Well, he eventually did create a Google Plus Hangout for folks who were of the Liberty perspective who wished to learn more about nonviolent communication. And I joined that group and learned with those people for a couple of years.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely get into NVC in just a minute. I wanted to ask you, though, how did you end up in Hawaii?
Yeah. Personal career choices and things. So yeah. Here's the deal. I did start my training as a holistic healthcare provider in 1998. And I was working as an assistant to a chiropractor who very quickly knew that I needed to get some type of paperwork and licensing behind me to protect me and to allow me to advance further in the field. So he did find an acupuncture college nearby so I wouldn't have to leave Vermont. My daughter was very young at the time, and moving and everything like that would have been a real pain and hassle. And I really did love Vermont. I still do. But he found a school not too far away, so I was able to commute, go to acupuncture college, and receive a lot of training And at the time, I thought that that would yield me my license of acupuncture. But by the tail end of that school process, unfortunately, I found out that the school did not have full candidacy for accreditation, and I was not able to gain my license of acupuncture.
Mm.
I basically had to sit on it and practice under the table for some years before I collected some methods to get undergrad credit for all of that schooling that I did at that acupuncture college, and take that and all of my credentials to a school that would accept me, and I had to go through all of acupuncture college all over again.
Wow.
So if I was making that important choice in my life, Kevin, if I'm going to do all of that work twice, again, basically, I'm going to do it in a new place where it's really beautiful. I mean, I could have chosen New Jersey as a setting to do all of that over again. But I chose Hawaii because after certainly visiting the school out here first, I decided that this would be really steps up from Vermont. And I still agree with that assessment. So I did go through Oriental Medical College again, although thankfully that school was merciful and allowed me to take challenge exams for all of the beginning classes. So I didn't have to sit through those beginning classes again. All I had to do was take a combined final and midterm exam, prove that I know the material, and then not have to sit for all those class hours for the very beginning material. And any courses that I wanted to take, I certainly could. And when it came to the more advanced classes, which were not replicated in my previous education, those were ones I was sitting with. And when you go through something twice, Kevin, you really get to know it well. So when I was done with acupuncture college, it wasn't very long before they tapped me to be a professor there, and I did that for a couple of years till the eventual failing of that college. There is an attack on holistic healthcare training institutes and colleges. If that college is under 100 people, it might just not have the funds to hire full-time people to handle all of the legalese and paperwork necessary to keep everything rolling.
Wow.
So you get to learn a lot of important things like that when you do this kind of work.
Yeah.
So that explains why I'm in Hawaii. And more importantly, while I was going through school the second time, I had a chance to basically study other subjects, certainly while I was commuting to school, because I lived some distance away from the college where I was going to. And I just had a chance to learn all kinds of interesting subjects. My mind's eye was opened to the subject of liberty, certainly forms of intellectual pursuits such as the trivium method of critical thinking, and eventually nonviolent communication, as well as everything else that you can hear on the School Sucks podcast. Pretty much, my mind's eye was fully opening like a flower to all these ideas while I was going through that a second time. And by the time I was out and working as professor, I just was really working hard to perfect this and begin my debut into the internet world of putting my voice out there.
Nice. So how did you originally, what was it that attracted you to getting into acupuncture?
Like many of us who go into the holistic healthcare field, we have health problems. And the systems that were available in orthodox medicine of the United States, things that are approved of by the American Medical Association and the Food and Drug Administration, were not only not effective, but they were counter-effective. They were actually painfully hurtful for my body, not useful. And as soon as I went to my teacher, who happens to be a chiropractor and also skilled in acupuncture, I was instantly getting quick relief. I did not have to wait. I did not have to suffer side effects. So I got into this field because I needed help. And after several years of him being my practitioner, I eventually got invited by him to be his assistant, like essentially being an apprentice and learning hands-on by doing and getting trained by him. He referred to me as a natural, that I had the skill innately. I could just go ahead and gain further skills with small bits of study under him. And then very quickly he sent me on to acupuncture college. So yeah, the reason I'm in this business is, of course, I saw that there were problems for myself. I definitely needed some skills to help my partner and my daughter. Certainly there are times where the weather in Vermont is kind of hardcore and will push the envelope health-wise if you
Right.
don't do everything perfectly. So that was definitely something that was really useful. I saw the utility, going farther and farther, and very quickly seeing it as my new career.
Awesome. How did you actually come across NVC? Like, what was the point where you started to learn about that and say, "Oh, wow, this is something that could really help me"?
Well, I would say that by the time I heard the words NVC again, because like originally I heard it back in Vermont, but I dismissed it because of the way it was being taught, and I didn't even understand why I was dismissing it. It just looked crappy. When you say this, I feel this because my need for this is not being met. Oh, Kevin, would you be willing to do this so my need for this can be met?
Uh-huh.
You know, I knew something was wrong with that, but I didn't really have the skills at that time to put my finger on it. So I put it aside for years till I got here to Hawaii. And amongst all of the things I was listening to, there was Complete Liberty with Wes Bertrand. And if you're listening into the Complete Liberty podcast and I'm pretty sure like in the before episode 100, there's definitely some anger and fury that he has towards police and other people of authority, and you can hear the frustration, and then you suddenly hear him talking about NVC and hear his voice completely change. Well, that was eye-opening for me. I was seeing, hey, there's some perspective going on. And so I found that in his podcast, he very quickly revealed all of the major components of nonviolent communication.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely considered like, hey, this is like another part for what I'm gathering, because I was already gathering cognitive skill sets. I mentioned the trivium method of critical thinking, something that is gone into depth on certainly Brett's podcast and other productions such as the Peace Revolution podcast by Richard Grove.
Uh-huh.
These other people, they delved into both of these subjects, but for the most part, Wes really, really focused on nonviolent communication in a very lucid way to me. So that's how I found it.
Yeah. So now my podcast is Freedom Lovin', talk about freedom obviously a lot. What, in terms of NVC, how do you see it as bringing more freedom into your life? Because you heard it on Complete Liberty. I mean, that's all about freedom as well. So yeah, what kinds of things can you think of when you think about NVC and freedom?
I think that finding methods to create balance inside of oneself is really useful. It's like the old expression, work smart, don't work hard.
Mm-hmm.
Let the tools do the work for you, that we have systems to run, basically. This is a very simplistic system. It's basically 8 components applied internally to yourself and analyzing yourself, and then externally so that you can use them to reduce friction and create harmony between yourself and others after you've done the work to create harmony within yourself. So what I was seeing was, here is something that when put into full mastery, when applied with grace and simplicity, this is something that would really, really reduce the tension and fear and anxiety that is so prevalent in so many other ways when things are, in various ways disorganized. You probably have heard of the Getting Things Done system by David Allen.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So that's a beautiful organizational and action-based system that I also like to apply. Nonviolent communication, as I was finding, was a window into seeing myself. It was really a force multiplier of taking the pressure off so that I didn't see my emotions as magically appearing with no real basis for what to do about them or what they specifically mean. Each feeling and emotion that I had was a reference point to point back to the things that I valued and desired. So That's basically a descriptor.
Yeah, that's awesome. So and you mentioned, you just said something about you kind of use this to improve yourself or to get yourself in a peaceful, harmonious state. Now, can you get into that a little bit more? Like, how do you do that with NVC?
The simple way is when you look at the OFNR model, that observations flowing into feelings, flowing into what's called needs, which are things that are valued and desired. They are abstract qualities. And then from there, that flows into tangible strategies, actions, including requests that we make of others or actual plans that we make in our head to ourselves. So that can be used internally by simply saying, well, okay, what's going on here? I observe that me and Kevin cannot connect over Skype in the normal way. So I definitely am going to have my thoughts about, should I do this? Can I do that? Can I suggest that? Like all the thoughts are coming up. And I can feel the tension and anxiety of like, is this going to is it going to get rescheduled again? All of that type of thing. The thoughts, and I'll feel a little bit of the fear and anxiety. And at the same time, I also notice I feel the excitement. I'm connecting to Kevin Koskela. Yeah. So I'm noticing that because I know that I value clear connection through a good quality microphone, which right now is basically the headset for my iPhone. Yeah. So, but I do have a nice, good quality microphone set up. So I value clear connection. I value clear communication and a lucid discussion, which we're having right now. And as soon as I identify each of those things, I then go on to the strategy where we flip to, okay, we're going to go ahead and Skype through the phone. That's okay, and that's an example of where I find myself, I see where I'm at, I just see the connections between what I observe, including thoughts that I'm having, and the values that I also hold as important to myself right now. I have a map of values that is unique to me at this moment, sort of like the map of values that is unique to you, Kevin, is different over there. And I use this just internally just to ground myself and understand what motivates me and what am I going to do about it. So that's me trying to answer that as quick as possible.
Yeah, no, that's great. So are there ways so when you're in a discussion with somebody, would you first empathize with yourself? Is that kind of how it works? That you empathize with yourself and then you go to the other person and then you empathize with them. You find out what they're feeling, what they're needing. Is that kind of the process that you're describing here?
It's the process that I choose to do, yes. There are millions of NVC users, and in all practical reality, I would like to say that there are millions of ways to apply NVC because of that. Now, there are going to be a lot of people who are going to copy similar methods. People love copying and doing and saying what everyone else does and says. I've noticed that.
Yeah.
I am allergic to that to some degree. I really, really, really despise doing that myself. And I do see that it gains you popularity points when you do that, when you say the same things, the same phrases like makes me feel. And I feel like you're being very attentive to my needs, Kevin, or things like that. I don't say those phrases. I do things differently. I prefer to focus on myself first and do that as quick as I can, as thoroughly as necessary, just to get to that point of balance, similar to the martial arts, where the first step is being rooted and grounded before engaging and before you have a bridge and contact.
Right.
So it's similar to that type of thing. Like I'm going to be very, very focused on my internal work by and large. And as soon as necessary, I have all these warning signs to tell me when it's important to focus on someone else.
Okay.
I have an objective in mind. That's what I've gained from my studies of the trivium method. So I might have several objectives, one of them in this case being clear communication, another one being empathetic bridge to another person, essentially an ephemeral connection of respect and caring between you and me, Kevin, that allows for transport of important information. Without that caring, without that respect, it's kind of like trying to drive your 18-wheeler across a cobweb. It could be very challenging. You better go fast, So it's like that, basically. That's my strategy is internal first and then interpersonal second.
Yeah, that's what I found. It becomes NVC becomes difficult when you try to go out first and then sort of roundabout empathize with yourself, because you've got to understand where your own thoughts and your own feelings are first, and then you can say, okay. And then does that ever, with you, does that ever involve like a kind of a pause in the conversation? Because I think that's where a lot of people struggle with NVC is like, okay, someone just attacked me or someone just made an accusation about me. And then it's like, how do you first deal with that, emotionally, and then go back to them and give them empathy?
Yeah, I like to define my terms if possible. So I try to understand what's going on, and if something that can be construed as an attack is going on, then there were things that led up to that. It usually doesn't come out of nowhere. It's usually a reason. Just like real combat doesn't come out of nowhere. There was a motive to start all of that. Now, going into something where it might be an understood type of sparring in the way that debates happen to be, where there's a plan to actually, for two people to engage discussion-wise and see if either one can be more convincing, usually to an audience. In that way, it's kind of an understood type of sparring kind of thing. And some people, they live like that. They live from debate to debate, basically. So they're ready to sink to the use of an ad hominem attack or other types of things like that. If that's going on, to me, it's just tipping their hand. They're basically tipping what they potentially are actually motivated by. So I use that as to my advantage to just like take the pressure off. There are four other components to nonviolent communication that when I ask a bunch of NVC users, they often are drawing a blank. They are the 4Ds of disconnected communication or life alienating communication. And it's in Marshall's book. So do you know about those?
Yeah, I've definitely heard about that. Do you want to go over that?
Yeah, because it's relevant to this.
Definitely.
Yeah. So if I'm receiving any of these 4Ds, I try to translate that, and that's something that I notice a lot of other people are not yet doing, but it's something I teach my students.
Okay.
The first D is demands. And when I have a demand coming at me, I mostly am translating that as very likely showing what motivates them, and extremely probably that that's what they actually are trying to request in a clumsy or semi-tragic way. They're couching their request in terms of a demand because probably they're emulating someone else who did that in their life previously.
Right.
They just are passively emulating behavior. They're not really maybe perfectly conscious of that. So in knowing that, it takes the pressure off. Like, oh, that I can see they're making a request of me, which is tipping their hand as to what motivates them.
Right.
So that softens it, and then I don't have to pause as long.
Okay.
Again, the same thing. Like what am I observing? What am I thinking? How am I feeling? And what motivates me? That the needs inventory list, which we'll get to, and then what action am I going to take? And that's, of course, based upon what my objective is. So if my objective is harmonious discussion, I'm going to keep that one in mind. The other D that would happen, more likely even, is an unrequested diagnosis. That's where people shout out labels, such as, you're not a real anarchist, Kevin.
Yeah.
You might have seen or heard that.
Yeah.
Or things like that. So when people give labels like that, I like to keep this in mind. Evaluation and judgment is going on all the time. Suppression of that judgment is, in my opinion, a very bad idea. It's more actually likely that the judgments that are going on are incomplete, kind of like an incomplete bowel movement, like always an uncomfortable feeling like you got to go back for a little bit more, or there's more wiping to do, basically. So sorry about the metaphors, but here we go. So the deal is, I translate an unrequested diagnosis as very likely a desire for understanding and clarity. It brings things into focus. People put everything and themselves into boxes, and that helps for organization. It puts handles on them. It's unfortunate that when the box is very, quickly labeled, and the description is too simplistic, such as not a real anarchist, that's way too simplistic of a description of Kevin Cascella, for sure.
Well, no, that makes sense. That makes sense because I don't have a mohawk, and I don't have a tattered leather jacket, and
Yeah.
I don't really carry around the little bombs, so so it makes sense.
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. I mean, there are worse adjectives and labels that you've been given, I'm sure, than that.
Yeah.
So it's an example where I get to take the pressure off by understanding that this person is tipping their hand and they are actually probably wishing to understand things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I can look for more signs to see if they're actually wishing to provoke me, if that's going on. That would be a different thing entirely. But for the most part, when I receive unrequested diagnoses to myself, I understand that they're probably not a professional provocateur. They're probably not actually trying to poke like painful points in my being, in my life.
Right.
They probably are actually used to doing this, that this is what they do all the time, or at least periodically. They give other people, everything around them, and themselves labels all the time.
Right.
And so in just knowing that they're after understanding, it takes the pressure off, and it gets my work done much faster. So moving on to the third D. Do you know these ones? The third and fourth D?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I thought so. No, really, you don't understand how many NVC people I query on the 4Ds, and they're draw a blank. That third D is deserve-oriented language.
Okay.
Yeah. It's the language of punishments and rewards. You're a good boy, Kevin. You've got everything all set up, so you deserve a reward. But your Skype recorder didn't work on connecting to computer to computer, so now you get a punishment for that.
Right.
And when we all deserve free healthcare. We all deserve free food and a basic minimum income. Mm-hmm. Deserve. Entitlement language. Entitlement thinking. Now, I'm not trying to dissuade people from wanting those free things. If they want them, by all means, go ahead and seek them. Mm-hmm. I have some other plans in mind for myself, for sure. Now, saying that other people deserve to give them to them, that goes into the realm of a demand, of course.
Right.
And I understand, I can translate that deserve-oriented language might originate from a desire to have continuity. If they were punished and rewarded in the past, then they would like you to be punished and rewarded based upon what they're observing. This is part of continuity. They might have a sense of justice and equality, and this is their semi-tragic way of thinking that they're achieving that. Mm-hmm. That just to see that those could potentially be motives. Now, of course, each individual, that's going to show real motives. So I'm like speculating on like a fake individual right now.
Right.
The language of deserve is going to be going on all around us, and just pointing it out is an opportunity to say, hey, it's okay. I understand you are after those things. Maybe we can find ways of getting them as well that don't involve any form of coercion,
Yeah.
So it opens a door for me, and it takes the pressure off when I understand where that's coming from. The final one, Kevin, that's denial of responsibility.
Okay.
Similar to deserve-oriented language, denial of responsibility is referring to basically that there is no cause and effect relationship that's necessary to focus on. Mm-hmm. I had to pull you over, Kevin, because I don't write the laws, I just enforce them.
Yeah.
And this is a situation that is going on in a lot of places. I can translate that in my head as it's a desire for ease and efficiency. Mm-hmm. It's the same as deserve-oriented language. It's so much easier if it's someone else's fault.
Right.
It's so much easier if you don't have to analyze the methodology, such as deserve-oriented language or denial of responsibility, or demands, or giving people diagnoses that they didn't pay for or ask for. Mm-hmm. So that's very important right there, is I just understand that for deserve-oriented language or denial of responsibility, ease and efficiency could be a serious motivator, that for them to analyze themselves would be, to some extent, painful. they would see too much, especially the older that they are and the more tragedies that they've engineered with using these 4Ds. So
Yep.
I try to understand that and keep that as a part of the perspective of who I'm talking to.
Yeah, that's really, really great stuff to keep in mind when going into conversations and possibly conflicts. Now, do you have any examples? Because you threw out a couple of things, like talking to someone that maybe doesn't agree with the non-aggression principle, like doesn't agree or doesn't really see that as being a priority. It doesn't see nonviolence as being priority. Do you have any examples of where you've talked to somebody like that and you've kind of had a conversation that actually went somewhere as opposed to breaking down into ad hominem attacks and everybody leaving dissatisfied?
Yeah, I didn't prepare for that question, but I'm going to do my best.
Yeah, it's just something I thought of when you were talking about that, because I think that's one area where, people like you and I, like, we're talking to people that maybe don't understand the liberty perspective. It is tough when you run up against things that sort of sound reasonable. Like everyone should get free healthcare, or everyone deserves a standard of living that matches such and such. And it sort of sounds okay on the surface, like that person's being a compassionate individual. And so then when you come in and say, well, I disagree, then it sort of often turns into this argument of like, well, you don't care. You just don't care. All you care about is yourself. And then it's like, you have to explain this, how it all works with, how the government extracts money from people. And it goes into this thing where it's like, it's very hard in my past of these kind of conversations to really get through to a lot of people.
Well, I have to tell you, Kevin, that I would highly recommend at least a beginning study of the trivium method of critical thinking, because it really adds strength to your NVC skill set. Mm-hmm. It really adds some muscle to it. As one part of it, you keep in mind your objectives. Yourself as the author of your message, so that's me right now. These words are my message, and you and your entire audience and the NSA are my audience. So I'm mostly tailoring my message to you, Kevin. And then, I kind of got an idea of who listens to Freedom Lovin'. So
yeah.
I know some of my friends do. So I have an idea of how to tailor my message and keeping my objectives clear. If one of my objectives is harmony in the discussion, I'm going to wish to connect and understand. I'll be using a bit more of the Socratic method of asking questions, trying to get clarity, because just because I might know my own objectives for having a harmonious discussion, it's important to understand the other person's objectives, and it's very, very likely that they don't know. Right. They don't really clearly, consciously have explicitly spelled out what the objectives for our discussion are. Mm-hmm. So if one of their objectives is to convince me of something, that we all need a basic minimum income that is taken from the tax monies in general, that's like fine, just to understand that's a thing. And then it could go into a realm of, well, okay, what degree of discovery and wonder do you have as far as looking deeply into this? Mm-hmm. Do you have the perspective of a crusty old professor who thinks that they know everything on that subject? Or do you have the perspective of more of a grad student who is actually developing a thesis the old-fashioned way by actually looking at data and then forming a hypothesis, instead of taking the hypothesis, which is a conclusion or logic, and then cherry-fitting grammar to support that and ignoring any grammar that refutes it? So of course, what I just recommended was the trivium in order, going from the data, which is grammar or information, over to understanding, which is the removal of contradictions, and that's logic. And then it moves down to a practical application of the knowledge and understanding, or the grammar and the logic, also known as rhetoric adds wisdom if it's practical. And if it's not practical, it's not wisdom. So, yeah, that's generally what I'm trying to do, is I'm wishing to understand myself as the author, my audience. I tailor my message to my audience. I keep my objectives clear. and I keep a pretty good idea of what active listening is. So even if the person I'm talking to doesn't have active listening skills, I can do that, and that often tends to reduce the pressure and tension in the discussion.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm not as familiar with the Trivium method. I've heard a little bit on School Sucks. I've heard you talk about it and others, but and I do want to get into that a little bit more because it's sort of a new topic here on this podcast anyway. But what about using NVC in terms of the question that I wrote to you was like using NVC? How has it allowed you to get what you want?
Well, there's nothing like taking the pressure off myself.
Yeah.
In all these various situations that I face, I see clients professionally, usually individually, but sometimes I actually see a client who comes in with their mom or something like that, and then I've got a real need for using this. Most people that I work with privately, they're humbled by their health condition. That's why they're seeing me. If they were a loose cannon and if they were a difficult person in general, they probably wouldn't have passed just the phone interview and wouldn't be seeing me.
Right.
So in most situations in my professional life, I'm able to at least gain some solid ground on myself as far as what motivates me. The list of needs, if anyone out there listening, if you went to type in cnvc.org, Charlie, Nancy, Victor, Charlie.org, and needs inventory, you can see a list of abstract qualities. Just in the quick identification of any of them and connecting that to the emotions that I feel takes the pressure off. So when I have the pressure off, I can see more clearly. I can think more clearly.
Right.
I think of nonviolent communication as a heart-based method. It's a skill set that can be developed to gain an insight into your own heart, certainly, and to hopefully help others with their situations, emotionally speaking. I see that having a cognitive skill set, which I like to point to the Trivium method, is useful for my mind, which I constantly am also going to be using. And I do see the getting things done method as an organizational and action-based strategy that incorporates both of them. And that's basically the gist of the book and online course that I'm creating.
Oh, nice. I didn't realize you were creating an online course.
Yeah, serious work in progress due to many other responsibilities, but I do have a nice mastermind group, gang who keeps me accountable to my goals.
Nice. Yeah, I definitely want to hear more about that. It sounds like it would be really something that would be really valuable to definitely for me and I'm sure a lot of listeners here.
Yeah, I'm dropping little hints on future shows we can do.
Oh yeah, for sure. Let's definitely talk about that offline after the show a little bit more too.
Yeah.
Now we had a little conversation over Facebook before, like a week ago, and I brought up the topic of needs. How in NVC there's a lot of talk about needs, and it's easy just to conflate all needs together. Well, these are all needs, so therefore they're necessary. But then there's different types of needs, and I was bringing up the idea of like we have a need for food in order to live. We have a need for shelter in order to live. And then you get to some of the other things that are considered needs, like a need for sex, but you don't die if you don't have sex. And there's a lot of other examples of that. Like I have a need for variety. And what exactly does that mean? Does that mean that you have a need for a variety of foods, and then you take that to the next step? It's like, well, I've been eating really healthy foods for a few days, so now I need really unhealthy foods to balance it out. So that's where it gets a little bit confusing when we talk about needs.
I agree. Originally, Marshall Rosenberg called that category in the system he developed action-oriented wants. That was his original term for this, and I'd have to say it's far more accurate. Because to many people, they're going to define the term needs as things that are unnegotiable as far as absolutely vital and important, such as food and air, etc. The food, air, shelter. those kinds of things, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Those are very important. They are the first part of the needs inventory that we're born with, the first kinds of things that are absolutely essential. A baby can survive without being touched,
Mm-hmm.
but there will be deficiencies that will occur. That's just a known thing from science, unfortunately.
Right.
You know, babies require touch. They require skin-to-skin contact. They require motion to some degree, not like kept in stasis and locked up.
Mm-hmm.
So at a certain point, what happens, as far as I can tell, is that all of these qualities that are highly valued and desired come into being. They flower like a flower opening up, basically. And that's us going from baby to child to adult. We emulate the adults around us and see the things that they value and desire and how they go ahead and acquire things that they vitally need. And often that's what we're doing as children. We are exactly emulating their behavior, going ahead, doing the same strategies that they're doing that seem to achieve the same type of satisfaction. That's what we all trained to do. So in NVC terms, calling all of these abstract qualities on that list needs, I find it very confusing, so I prefer to call them values and desires and needs.
Mm-hmm.
I like to spread it around a little bit. You're right. I can live without sex, but it sucks. So, it's the same type of thing. Like, I could technically live on a completely deserted island and not communicating to anyone.
Right.
So my communication needs would be completely Darrell centric,
Yeah.
like Darrell talking to Darrell, the echo chamber of Darrell. Just like Tom Hanks in Castaway.
Right.
There's me talking to a volleyball.
Yeah.
So, they're very important things. I think that the science of nonviolent communication and the art of practicing it was a helpful eye-opener to many people to see that those qualities, those abstract qualities, are vitally important in a different way, meaning that just like certain vital amines, that's where we get the word vitamin, vital amino acids. So these important little qualities, you can go without certain of these vital amines for a very, very long time, but problems will happen. Mm-hmm. You can certainly go without feeling satisfied with all the qualities on the needs inventory list, or if it was a Darrell Becker based curriculum, a value and desire list. Mm-hmm. And you could find yourself probably having the reciprocal feelings based upon how much you value those qualities. This is the cool thing about nonviolent communication, is you have a chance to go back and forth between the two sides of the chart. One side is tangible. That's observations, and that includes thoughts that you may wish to write down. And underneath that is what is called requests, which I like to call strategies and actions and requests. Mm-hmm. Because I don't wish to focus upon getting all of my things that I value and desire accomplished by requesting that of other people all the time. I'm going to take action that doesn't involve other people, and so to make that precise in language, I'm going to call that strategies and actions, mm-hmm. and requests sometimes. So that's how I like to look at it. That's the tangible side. The abstract side are the feelings and the values, desires, and needs. Those are abstract qualities. There's no respectometer. There's no sadometer. I don't have those apps on my phone. There's no tool that can measure those things. We feel physiological things in our bodies that give us evidence of our emotions, and that in turn can point to the abstract qualities that we might be deficient in or satisfied with. Mm-hmm. So that's what a few words on those terms regarding needs and requests.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that as someone that's maybe a beginner NVC, like just learning it, maybe the idea of just everything is needs, just on this in these columns, maybe that's an easier way to start with it. But then as you get more practice and you sort of get into various conversations, maybe the separating things out is an important thing to do.
Yeah. Whatever perspective is going to yield you the results you want. That's what it comes down to, and
Yeah.
I personally like values and desires. Other people see great value in calling them all needs and trying to kind of preach the gospel of needs. Like, these are all needs, these are all needs. And if you do that, I would say good luck to you, because there's going to be a lot of people saying, no, those are not needs.
Right. Yeah.
You don't need that, because you would not die without it. So therefore you don't need it.
Yeah.
And I just like to say, okay, I hear both of you guys.
Right.
I'm going to call them things that are valued and desired. And I'm going to also further understand that it's going to be a unique topographical map, in a way, of what qualities are valued and desired by each individual.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, for example, for you over there, if you're enjoying a really long-lasting, committed relationship, you've got those needs met, those ones that I don't right now, because my last long-term relationship ended in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm working to acquire that again. So
Yeah.
it shows you the map that's important to each individual when you actually spread out those adjectives and look at it individually. You probably have seen or looked at Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Sure.
Yeah. So that's trying to simplify it and put it across the board for almost everyone. And to some degree it has an application.
Yeah.
Because I know that when I'm having survival-based needs, those are, so-called down there in the bottom chakra, kind of makes it hard to get up to the creative and sexual-based needs, because I'm very focused on the survival-based needs,
Right. Right.
So, and that's below that. So it's first. And the same way, achieving the enlightenment and other types of things is really going to be pretty much at the pinnacle, and all those things are going to lead up to it. But I like the topographical map approach better for day to day, because I can look at each of those qualities and I can assess myself. How am I doing? What are my strategies to achieve those? And how's that working for me?
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, I would love to get into the trivium method. I want to talk more about that, but I think we'll save that for another show. So we're running up against a little bit of time. I got to run here in a few minutes, but Darrell, it's been awesome having you on. I love what you're saying here. I think it's really applicable to everyone in any situation. And so thanks so much for all your knowledge here and coming on and taking the time to come on the show.
It was my pleasure, Kevin. I look forward to next time.
Yeah, absolutely. And your website, voluntaryvisions.com, if anyone wants to check out Darrell's other appearances on various podcasts. And are you on any other shows or video shows or anything like that?
I definitely go on Nathan Fraser's show, Anarchopreneur, whenever I can. I definitely like to go on a lot of other shows that are spacing my mind right now. The Anarcho-Yakulist podcast that I'm going to be on later this afternoon. You can go to voluntaryvisions.com and skim through and find my appearances.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks again, and good luck with everything.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Freedom Lovin' Podcast. If you want to give us a rating review, really appreciate that. And today's music is the XX with one of my favorite songs called Islands. Enjoy and have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.
Spend my nights and days before searching the world for what's right here underneath and unexplored islands and cities I have looked. Here I saw something I couldn't overlook. I am yours now. So now I don't